real quick, man, I'm very interested in walking out on this limb with you all, or maybe by myself. When I turn around, I'll be by myself. I I I'm just gonna play. Let me just play this because anyway, let me just play this clip from Chappelle. Let's just play this clip.
A lot of the LBGTQ community doesn't know the baby's history. He's a wild guy. He once shot a and killed him in Walmart. Oh, this is true. Google it. The baby shot and killed a in Walmart in North Carolina. Nothing bad happened to his career. Do you see where I'm going with this? In our country, you can shoot and kill a but you better not hurt a gay person's feelings.
Now, listen, I think Chappelle is a genius. I think he's hilarious, and I think he's largely right when he makes these points. And he did it in his last thing, in this most recent one, where he talked about, he refers to himself as transphobic, but does it in a way that I think leaves room for honest conversation in a welcoming way. And he talks about working with that community and said he's not going to tell any more trans jokes until he's laughing with that community as well. So, but I think he raises a very important point. In the last special he did, where he got a lot of grief, I disagreed with a number of people on this issue around because what I see happening is that people are transposing an anti-LGBT claim or argument onto Chappelle's race first analysis, which is bothering a lot of people, which is the true origin of what is bothering people in what he's saying. And because I think the same joke he told before when he was talking about working with a TV executive and around his ability to use the F word versus the N word. And when he was told he couldn't use the F word because he was not gay, he then asked, well, then why am I allowed to use the N word? And again, the point being, why do I get to be demeaned as a Black person and nobody has a problem? But as soon as another community is demeaned, all of a sudden I'm in trouble. And I think he raises a very interesting point. And so for all the grief DaBaby is getting, maybe that he deserves, I think people are willfully ignoring this aspect of it. Now, the one thing I think Chappelle left out, and then I'll stop here, is that DaBaby wasn't just making fun of or criticizing the LGBT community. From the clips I saw, he was going way beyond that into claims about HIV and they're ruining humanity and all this other kind of stuff. So I think that goes into another category. But I think in general, a lot of the response that is involved here involves a critique of his race first analysis. So anyway, there it is. That's it.
Well, I mean, I think Chappelle is hilarious. So that's one. Let me just put that in one caveat. He's always been hilarious to me. I think his take on sort of society and all that kind of stuff has always been funny. I've always been down with comedy that's, that's like, not safe comedy, or just like, people consider it sort of scary or dangerous, or like it's against the social norms. So there's something about that I always found funny, whatever like that. I just watched the last special. So it wasn't as funny, I thought, as some of his other specials, because I also think I don't go to comedy for a lot of my sort of political education per se. It's not so much, I don't think that comedians don't make witty or interesting commentaries on life and so forth and so on. But when I hear it within a comedic framework, for me, it's always about whether or not it was funny or not, and whether or not it was, some truth telling or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I kind of, I don't necessarily, even when he's making his points, some of them I agree with. But I also think I think what I see is a community, I don't want to make a generalized statement about anybody's community, but a community that at this particular stage is putting out, it's a community that's organized and that is fighting back against what it sees as harmful, and whether or not I think some of some of the ways in which we're checking people are going too far, or it doesn't allow, freedom of expression and all that kind of stuff. But, I think it's an organized community that's fighting back. And so I get that, a part of that. And I think people are setting new norms that they may want everybody to accept. And I think that's going to be a societal battle about what people are comfortable with, what they agree with, and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes I agree with one thing he said was like, and from their perspective, it was like, we don't give a fuck if you agree with it or not. And I even agree with that. Like, do you, right? So but I compliment Chappelle on not shying away from something that everybody else, and relatively speaking, a way that's supposed to bring humor and potential light to something, as opposed to, I don't think his intent is to do harm, or to obviously do like a baby, and he's like criticizing people's lifestyles and so forth and so on. But I think he is saying that there's this contradiction that somehow you're going to tell me there's a topic that's off limit for me as a quote unquote artist or a comedian. And it's almost like one of those things, like once you tell me it's off limits, well, then I'm about to go all in. And so I respect that in a sense of like, he's not backing off.
Brooklyn.
Yeah, I respect that. Like, he's not backing off. He's continuing to go on. But I just don't think this particular special was as funny as those last two, which I did think were completely hilarious. Yeah.
Well, this was his last one to get that check to fulfill the contract, right?
More. In 2 years, there's going to be another contract and some more comedy specials. This is too much money at this stage.
So I haven't seen this yet. This is my first time seeing that clip. Like, I saw Dave Chappelle and the baby trending yesterday, but I didn't click on enough things to actually find the source of why they were trending. I think the premise of Dave Chappelle, or rather the framing of his whole joke setup, is off to begin with. Like, first of all, Dave Chappelle ain't never been canceled for making no gay jokes. The baby ain't been canceled for even going on homophobic and transphobic rants. So what is this sort of fantasy that these celebrities have, or, delusion, I should say, about being canceled? Oh, niggas got canceled. Show me the proof. Where's the evidence? Dave Chappelle just got another check from Netflix. He ain't been canceled. The baby's still making all kinds of appearances and tours and features on other people's projects. He hasn't been canceled. So where's the proof, first of all, that anybody has been canceled for anti-gay speech? And second of all, like Chappelle, again, I want to see the show in its entirety, but on his previous comedy specials on Netflix, for reasons that I don't understand, he seems to place himself as an antagonist to the gay community, or he always seems to like rope them into his bit somehow. And it's like, it's almost becoming like a crutch. Like, why do you keep even talking about these people, Dave Chappelle? Like, if their actions bother you so much, why is this seeming to be like a recurring theme in your comedy? You don't seem to move on. And from my perspective, Dave Chappelle is a very popular, very wealthy Black man who has achieved a certain level of status. For him to keep coming back to the gay community and his perceived power about their ability to cancel him or whomever, it's very much to me like punching down. Like, he's not punching up. Like, Dave Chappelle is not attacking any systemic power systems here, or calling out anybody, in my opinion, that have a lot of the power that he claims that the gay community seems to have. So it's all very odd to me. I feel like that Dave Chappelle could take the time and use his platform to actually punch up instead of punching down onto other marginalized communities for reasons I don't understand. And I would actually prefer like a member of the LGBTQ community to weigh in on this and see what they think about it, because I look at it and I'm sort of befuddled. I'm like, what, are we doing this again? What is the reason?
It's very interesting that you use the term punching down, because that's one of the things that he actually critiques in his comedy special as a talking point against him, is that people say that in his comedy, he is punching down by doing jokes about or in reference to LGBTQ communities. So I think that's a very interesting, and he has his own response. I don't remember it verbatim or whatever. But I'm not here to think or suggest I know why Dave Chappelle is doing what he's doing, except to say that I think part of his comedy is to suggest that there's nothing off limits in terms of talking about something that could be perceived as different or funny or needs to be talked about. There's no there's no sacred cows. And I mean, he does some jokes on Martin Luther King and fellatio in here, but I think people would be like, what the fuck? If it wasn't talking
old,
about,
man. Don't you remember in Barbershop, like they got on Cedric the Entertainer for calling Martin Luther King a hoe? You know what I mean? Like, okay, that might have been edgy
Rosa
10
Parks
years ago.
just sat down. Yeah.
Huh?
But again,
and that he just said that Rosa Parks just sat down. She like, why we like all she did was sit down.
Like,
and the question becomes whether or not
the gay community is not edgy. That's not a sacred cow. That's actually very old. It's tired and it's trite. Like, I mean, the gay people have been the butt of comedians' jokes for the advent of comedy. Like, I mean, how long? Like, how much longer? How much longer are we going to find, experiences or shit that the gay people have to say, like, as fodder for jokes? Like, it's lazy to me.
But the question for me is then, is it the same thing could be said about the Black community, right? The only community who's newly being pillared or talked about in certain jokes would probably be like white straight communities over the last, Richard Pryor days. Like that's only like a 30 or 40 year period. Prior to that, they controlled completely the narrative of what was considered funny or not funny. Our particular comedians have never moved off the topic of like nigga jokes, lazy jokes, big lips jokes, the difference between Black and white jokes. That's a constant refrain in Black comedy, which is obviously has its origins in minstrel comedy about Black people, right? Whether or not it's now taken to a point where it's done a little differently, or it's more edgy, or it's considered funnier, or just like it's an inside joke because it's about us. Although when you perform it on stage, nothing is really an inside joke because it's a mass audience that gets to see it. But that stuff has been since verbatim, and you're right. Like no one, but there is a thing like, if a white comic says something similar about Black people these days, and that white comic potentially can suffer backlash, right? And I think that's similar to what it can happen even if we're saying that there's not a lot of evidence of it. There's people who do walk lightly around, and maybe for good reasons, right? Certain things that they'll say about another community that they may not be a part of, because they're scared that they may be a backlash or so forth. And I'm usually just of the option of, when I hear comics, again, it's different strokes of different folks. But I'm like, for me, if it's funny, well, put it like this. People have a right to say it, particularly for me, that's comedy. And it's not like a political speech, because for me, it's about whether or not it's funny or not, or humorous enough.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I mean, we don't hear as much fat jokes as we used to hear, right? Like at certain points, some of these themes do get tired and they get worn out. And really, it takes the genius that I think Chappelle is comedically. This leaves me really disappointed in him, because I think he's capable of more. Like if he got up there and told 30 minutes worth of fat jokes, everybody would be angry about that. And the same is not said for other communities. So
I'm not mad at fat joke. I know, and people don't like. You can't
be.
do that. Why can't you do fat jokes anymore?
If you're fat, you can do fat jokes.
There's light skin jokes. There's fat jokes. There's big head jokes. There's bald jokes. There's short jokes. I mean, again, within the framework of comedy, right? I think we have to laugh at our foibles and be able. Because then, to me, the other danger
at someone else's expense if that's not your experience.
So you can only tell fat joke if you're fat.
But see,
yes.
so as I, no, I don't agree with that.
I do.
But part of Chappelle's approach that I think has to be understood, whether we agree with it or not, is that he's saying he defends all comics to say any and everything. He defends racist comics. He defends anybody, conservative political comics. His whole point is anybody should be able to make fun of anything and say anything on stage. If you don't like it, then you deserve to be able to be critical of it. So, I don't see him as picking on the LGBT community or punching down. I see him as responding to the zeitgeist. And in this moment, that community justifiably is raising its voice on all issues and is involving itself in to Kamal's point, in a very organized way in many different issues. I don't always agree with the way they intervene as a so-called overall community, to the extent that that's possible to define. And I think that some of the nuance that he draws out is legit for you know, a comedian. And the last one, he also, you know, drew fire for his criticism, you know, of the so-called feminist movement or popular feminism. So
Which he does again in this one.
right. So I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't see him as just picking on this particular group. And then I also think part of his point, I don't think he says it this way, but I think to the way I've interpreted part of his point, and others who agree with him, and I don't know where I'm still working out my own conclusion on this, is that I don't think he sees himself as punching down to the LGBT community. I think he sees them as having equal or more power, and in the moment. And I certainly would agree that segments of the LGBT community, particularly rich white men, have that much more organized influence over the national conversation around these issues, which I think should not mean that they're off the table. But in general, I don't think it would be appropriate to tell comics or anyone that anything is off limits, and that they can't talk about something because they're not part of that group. I think that would not only, I mean, I think it would destroy the art, and I think it would hurt broader conversation. We can't have conversations that only are led by people or only involving people of that particular category.
You know, one thing I
That's
will
the
say,
problem,
Kim,
though.
yeah.
But that's the problem, though. People are speaking on communities that are not from them communities. And if people that, for example, Dave Chappelle, who has a very large voice, large following, his voice gets heard more than the other people that claim to come that are from that community. You understand? So like I just want evolution. That's it. Like I'm not interested in hearing 20th century comedy in the 21st century. Like I want these comics to evolve and do better and tell better jokes. And like I will look at this special. I haven't seen it yet. But you know, I laugh at Chappelle. I laughed at him more when I was younger. I laugh at him a lot less now that I'm older and intend to consider more people's perspectives outside of my own. But I mean, I don't know. We'll see.
Right.
I'll see
Well,
if
two quick things. I think I do agree with you, Kim. Well, the two things, like one, I think this particular special is a little too preachy and a little less funny because he's trying to, in essence, he's trying to wrap up in a bow and tie, you know, what his prior specials in terms of some of the pushback, let's say, he's gotten, like what he was trying to say. And I think that leads to a certain preachiness that's creeping into his comedy, that he thinks is pontificating or analysis, which I think maybe is a bit much for, like, okay, you're going to give you a bit much for me when I'm looking for comedy. So that's just my own interpretation. But two, I think the other thing is that, you know, in terms of talking about the dynamic of race, class, sexual orientation, you know, there should be a pointing out of like, yeah, LGBTQ comedians have not been allowed to, right, and have not risen to the stardom of a Dave Chappelle or other straight comics, right? And you can't just say, you know, oh, it's not one that's funny yet, because then that's the same bullshit argument that they're used with us. It's folks are not getting the promotion, the deals, they're not allowed to work their ways up way in club. And that may be happening now more than ever than in the past, but there's still that limitation or exactly on who gets to have access to the mic in a way that allows the different ideas, even through a comedic lens, to sort of come out there and even to challenge the comedic lens of a Dave Chappelle, right? You don't get that. There is no sort of comic at the level of a Chappelle or other straight male comics. Again, this is an industry that is still dominated mostly by straight males, and it's an industry that straight white males who are not as funny as a lot of the straight black males have time over time dominated. And it's only recently that now you're allowed to have more than one black comic who gets to be at the sort of forefront of what's considered funny or the leader of the pack. You know, it's only now that we're getting to a point where now you can have two or three, right, at one time. But that's also a part of the sort of the racialized history and the sexist history in terms of the country that limits the amount of Black women, LGBTQ community and comedians who can raise to that certain level and have that certain notoriety as their white male counterparts.
Well, as you all planned it, you've left no time for me to respond because the ear doctor is standing by. So well done to the two of you. And let's move on to, no, I'm just playing. Anyway, I know the ear doctor's ready. We got to get to him, but I just look forward to having this conversation more and going on. So thank you both very much. What's up, sir?
Hey, listen, I would. That was a good special. I watched it last night too, and I love the fact that artists got to be artists. You got to be able to clown stuff. You got to be able to have fun and make funny stuff. Listen, I don't know how to pronounce a lot of words. Do I get mad because somebody says, "Yo, you can't spell blah"? No.
Yeah, but are you making fun of people who can't speak? You understand? Like, no, because that's not the community you come from.
It depends on how it's done, how it's made relatable to other people, and also including that person into the, like how he did it. It was masterful. He actually included the people that he was talking about in his conversation and how he got to learn from them. So I encourage y'all to watch the special.